The changes in the climate have already had some significant impacts on our agricultural system and have resulted in billions of dollars of losses thus far.
Hi, and welcome to GAO's Watchdog Report, your source for news and information from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. I'm your host, Holly Hobbs. American farmers, ranchers, and other agricultural producers are increasingly facing the impacts of climate change. Droughts, for example, can lead to crop losses and large financial costs for farmers. Federal insurance programs can help offset some of these financial impacts, but as extreme weather events increase, so does the government's financial exposure. Today we'll talk with GAO's Steve Morris, an expert on federal agriculture programs, about some steps being taken to enhance climate resilience in farming and what more can be done. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here with you today, Holly.
So, Steve, can you start by giving us some examples of how climate change is already impacting farmers and ranchers?
Yeah, absolutely, Holly. Farmers and ranchers are really on the front lines of climate change. They're going to continue to experience extreme weather events now and in the future. So we're likely to see some areas of the country, for example, experiencing high temperatures and frequent droughts and devastating fires. But you're going to have other areas that are going to experience severe storms and torrential rainfall and major flooding. The changes in climate are also going to probably spread harmful pests and disease to new areas, which is going to make farming and ranching even more difficult.
What about the financial impacts? What have they been so far, and what's the government's role in helping farmers with those costs?
The changes in the climate have already resulted in billions of dollars of losses. As there's more and more extreme weather events, the cost of providing financial assistance to farmers and ranchers impacted by events also increases. You'll see over the last several years, Congress has directed more than $15 billion in aid to farmers because of losses due to natural and weather-related disasters. Another way the government helps farmers is through the federal crop insurance program. And this is a multi-billion-dollar program which provides coverage on over 100 different crops and products. And according to USDA, the overall cost of the program actually could increase almost 40% in the coming decades if no action is taken to enhance the climate resilience of farmers and ranchers.
And what about the impacts on consumers? For example, what could we see at the grocery store?
Climate change is going to have some multiple, I'd say, cascading impacts. So what you're going to see is, as the environment's impacted, so will our agricultural system and productivity. And in turn, that's going to impact the availability and cost of food as well. You'll also see on a broader scale impacts on our society and economy as a whole. You have to remember U.S. agriculture is really a huge business. It accounts for almost 20 million jobs. So any significant impact could have a devastating impact also on people's livelihoods, right? So think of it this way. It's very essential, right? It touches all of us, hopefully every day, 3 times a day. We need to make sure that our agricultural system is strong and that farmers and ranchers are really resilient to the extreme weather events coming their way. That's what building resilience is really all about, right? It's about taking action today so that we can help minimize the effects of disaster tomorrow.
So, Steve, with all that said, what is the Department of Agriculture doing to help reduce this exposure or to help farmers and ranchers avoid climate-related losses?
Well, Holly, the good news is that USDA has already taken some important steps, and I'll give you a couple of examples. USDA has created a climate change program office, and it's essentially a way of the department coordinating all the efforts that are designed to provide some assistance to farmers and ranchers. USDA has also established what's called regional climate hubs, and there's about 10 of them across the country. And these hubs are really designed to provide some real-time, region-specific information to farmers and ranchers to help them better understand the vulnerabilities they're facing and also provide some ways to mitigate against some of those risks. So just as an example, we looked at one hub that developed, it basically was an online tool that farmers could access to identify specific actions they could take. So for example, planting drought and heat-tolerant crops in areas of the country that were predicted to become drier and hotter.
And you said these were some important steps, but in our report, we identified some additional actions USDA should be taking, right?
Well, USDA has made some good progress. We found some additional opportunities that could help enhance some of their climate resilience efforts. So we identified 13 options that we think could prove helpful. These include things like, and I just mentioned the climate hubs, but expanding their role and their capacity so they could serve even more farmers and ranchers throughout the country. Another is creating some additional incentives in programs such as the federal crop insurance program to basically encourage and incentivize farmers to adopt what's considered climate resilient practices like planting cover crops and improving irrigation systems, that sort of thing. Now, each option we identified has its strengths and limitations. We acknowledge that. But, we think by implementing multiple options, USDA could kind of leverage some of the strengths and limitations of these various options. In addition to all that, some of these options, if adopted, really could enhance the resilience of the USDA efforts and also reduce the government's fiscal exposure to the effects of climate change. So that's a good thing.
So we've shared our list of 13 things with USDA. How did they respond?
We did share this with the department. They essentially agreed that a combination of the various options we identified would likely be more effective in helping producers enhance their climate resilience. They told us, however, that they may need some additional authority and additional resource to fully implement all these options.
So Steve just told us that the Department of Agriculture has already taken important steps to help farmers and ranchers respond to climate change and reduce federal financial exposure, but that we identified additional steps USDA could take to improve its efforts. So Steve, what needs to happen for USDA to act on the additional steps we identified?
We made a recommendation that USDA conduct pretty comprehensive analysis of the 13 options we identified as a way to help guide and prioritize their own climate resilient efforts. And we also specified that USDA should identify any additional authority or resources it may need to implement these various options. The good news here is that USDA agreed with the recommendation and they're taking some initial steps to implement it.
And last question, what's the bottom line of this report?
We're already seeing changes in climate, right? And it's already had major impacts on farmers and ranchers. And these impacts are expected to worsen in the future. The government really can play a key role here in helping ranchers and farmers by really supporting them in terms of enhancing their resilience. Implementing the options we identified in our report would be an important step in that direction. And in turn, it's going to help reduce the government's fiscal exposure to the effects of climate change.
That was Steve Morris talking about GAO's recent review of climate resilience in agriculture. Thanks for your time, Steve.
Thank you, Holly.
And thank you for listening to the Watchdog Report. To hear more podcasts, subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And make sure to leave a rating and review to let others know about the work we're doing. For more from the Congressional Watchdog, the U.S. Government Accountability Office, visit us at gao.gov.